What's up, everybody, and welcome to another exciting video here on the Manly Battleships YouTube channel. I'm Mr. Panda.
And I'm Roxstar.
Today we're going to be doing a ranking video for Saturday. Aren't you super excited? We're going to be ranking the 23 films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far. Are you ready?
Let's just jump into it.
Now, both myself and Roxstar have ranked the movies according to our own personal means and preferences, and we're going to break them up into groups of 5 plus the top 3. That means we're starting with ranks 23 through 19. For rank 23, Mr. Panda, The Incredible Hulk.
For Roxstar, The Incredible Hulk.
Look at that, we agreed on something right off the bat. The Incredible Hulk was not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm sure when fans go to marathon the whole MCU, Incredible Hulk never makes it out of its case. Number 22. For Roxstar, Thor, The Dark World.
For Mr. Panda, Thor, The Dark World. Look at that, we continue to agree on just how not good certain movies are. Thor: The Dark World was so disappointing, at least it would have been disappointing if I remembered what the movie was about at all. It's really interesting that at the end of the MCU, they did the same thing that Fast and the Furious did with Tokyo Drift, and they made it canon, because I didn't even remember that what was going on was connected to Thor: The Dark World until after I saw Endgame.
Unfortunately, everything I remember from Thor: The Dark World came from Endgame going, oh yes, that thing. I kind of remember that now.
Who are you and why are you important was what I was saying a lot. Number 21. For Mr. Panda, Thor.
And for Roxstar, Iron Man 3. Well, we were bound to disagree at some point.
It's worth noting that when I set up my clusters, I kind of grouped all the movies that I thought were about equal into sets of 5, which is how we ended up with this structure. Of course, with the exception of The Incredible Hulk and Thor: Dark World. I don't really think that anything past that is a bad movie per se. But in the realm of ranking these movies, Thor really goes down towards the bottom. While I think it's relatively equal with the other two that we still have to go through in this cluster, let me tell you, Thor just didn't do it for me. There were some moments, some entertainment, yeah, he threw the mug, but overall it just wasn't a fulfilling story for me.
Whereas I fear that Iron Man 3 kind of belongs right next to Thor: The Dark World in the sense that the canon never really made it to fruition past its own movie. Everything that happened in Iron Man 3 was kind of contained within Iron Man 3, up and into including the way Tony's PTSD manifested. I actually prefer the way of Tony's PTSD manifesting, but then it just completely goes away and develops into something completely different later. Kind of feels like it's not canon, which is why it ranks so low for me.
Not to mention, the Mandarin was kind of lame. Now for me, it goes up a couple more notches above Thor, but I get your point.
Number 20. For Roxstar, Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
For Mr. Panda, Avengers: Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron is the most disappointing entry in the entire spectrum of Avengers movies. It's not that the movie isn't okay, but they really underutilized James Spader as the villain, and quite frankly, the way they kill off Quicksilver was awful. I just like, how lame is it that Quicksilver dies to a bullet?
I'll give you that, but for me the problems in Captain America: The Winter Soldier ends up with severe consequences later down the road with Captain America. It begins this downfall and breakdown of Cap's morals, which can be seen all the way into Endgame.
Number 19. For Mr. Panda, Iron Man 3.
For Roxstar, Thor.
So with one exception, Roxstar and I kind of ended up with the same cluster here. The biggest problem I had with Iron Man 3 is that it's been repeating the same formula that they set up in the original Iron Man, which seems to be Tony Stark and more suits. And while Roxstar appreciated the way they did the villain in the end, it was kind of a letdown to suddenly have a last-minute reveal of a guy who ultimately ended up being not that cool or interesting. In many ways, it's the reason most people don't remember that Jeff Bridges was the villain in the first Iron Man, because Iron Man doesn't end up with very interesting villains most of the time.
I have to agree with your reasonings in Thor about it just not being a very good origin story in general. It was very bland. You barely remember. I didn't even remember the Stan Lee cameo until I rewatched it. So, I mean, it's got funny moments, but it's ultimately a letdown. That brings us to the next cluster. Number 18. For Roxstar, Captain America, Civil War.
For Mr. Panda, Ant-Man. Ant-Man was kind of cool and technologically interesting, but at the end of the day, I thought that it was underwhelming as an origin story. After going through so many already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I didn't need one more of those.
I just can't believe you ranked it this low. For me, while this is still a further breakdown of Cap's morals, Civil War was very poorly done. If you watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it makes a little bit more sense because the government shouldn't be keeping superheroes together and keeping all their names, like it could be leaked. That makes so much more sense there. Whereas I felt like both Cap and Tony didn't have a reason either way to fight over the Accords. They did not make their arguments strong enough for me to warrant the whole fight. That being said, I do love the big fight scene with everybody at the end.
Number 17. For Mr. Panda, Captain Marvel.
For Roxstar, Avengers, Age of Ultron.
Captain Marvel blew onto the scene seemingly at the last minute to set up an important character for the final showdown, which is fine, and it was kinda cool in some ways, but it felt like the earliest attempts from Marvel to create origin stories. It didn't feel like it was bringing anything new to the table, it just introduced a highly overpowered character, and one that just happened to be female.
Age of Ultron felt like it was supposed to be the catalyst for eventually Civil War, and yet it was still kind of underwhelming. Yeah, the plot's a little bit better on this one than, say, Civil War, but it just wasn't that great of a movie. Felt like very disorganized. And yes, I also agree with Panda. Quicksilver dying to a bullet, it doesn't seem right.
It felt like they were just trying to prove characters could die, because literally no one was dying ever.
Number 16. For Roxstar, Iron Man 2.
For Mr. Panda, Iron Man. We owe a lot to Iron Man. It got onto the scene and completely changed the way we expected superhero movies to work. It allowed the MCU to actually take place. We owe it a great debt. How does it stack up against the rest of the universe, though? I don't know. About 1/3 up the chain. That's it for me. It does have a very solid lead, but as I mentioned earlier, while Jeff Bridges is a fantastic actor, they didn't write a role for him to really stand out. And by the time we get to the second phase, he's been forgotten entirely as anything relevant in either Tony's story or the wider universe.
And for me, Iron Man 2 was just Iron Man repeated, which at the time was great because at the time, Iron Man was awesome. But when you rewatch the whole series and looking back, a second Iron Man that's literally the same repeat as the first one isn't as great as you remember it.
Number 15. For Mr. Panda, Captain America Civil War.
For Roxstar, Marvel's The Avengers.
Roxstar already covered a lot of the things that would be wrong with this film for me in the previous section. The high points in this film are definitely the combat scenes. They're great, they're well executed, they're well choreographed. I have no problems with that. The reason it fell down the chain is the plot. It's a little bit threadbare at points. I don't know if I would necessarily agree that they have nothing to fight about. The part that really stuck out to me in the end was, from a certain point of view, Captain America is actually wrong on this one. I'll summarize it like this. Just keep in mind, the rules that they're writing aren't for the Avengers. They're for the people that will come after the Avengers. And Cap's refusal to understand that is what makes him almost kind of a bad guy.
And Marvel's The Avengers is a very iconic movie because when it first came out, it was the epic crossover we didn't expect to happen. In fact, even Kevin Feige at the time he made Iron Man without thinking that there would ever be an Avengers. So that was like the original Endgame before Endgame was the pinnacle of this whole series that we've come to enjoy and love. It was a very well-made movie for its phase. Number 14. For Roxstar, Captain Marvel.
For Mr. Panda, Captain America the First Avenger. Captain America the First Avenger presents us with a very upstanding young 40s style guy who's down on his luck but finds a way to not only contribute to the war effort, but become the first superhero, if you will. It's a great film. I love it to death. It ranks alongside these other movies because it has its strong points, but Captain America as a character doesn't fully come to fruition in this film, so it bumps itself a little bit down the ladder compared to other things.
I kind of find it a little ironic when I went to do my list that Captain Marvel fell here where it did, because as you'll see with my next two picks, it kind of is one of the first Phase 3 movies that lands very close to all the Phase 1 and Phase 2. And that's because at the end of the day, as much as I enjoyed the film, it still felt very much like a first phase film. The origin story wasn't as grand as I expected out of Marvel at this point. My expectations were extremely high, especially when you're sandwiching her between Infinity War and Endgame.
Quick reminder, of course, that at this point we're not really talking about bad movies, we're just trying to explain to you why some movies were not as good as others. So on to the next bracket. Number 13. For Mr. Panda, Marvel's Avengers.
For Roxstar, Captain America, the First Avenger.
Once you get over the pretentious title of this film, you end up with one of the earliest success stories of the MCU. And I don't just mean good story writing, I don't just mean the fight scenes, I mean it really brought things together for the first time and let us all know what could be accomplished with a serial film format. It wasn't the greatest thing that they ever made, but it did give us a hint of things to come.
I will always have a special little place in my heart for Captain America, the First Avenger. For multiple reasons. It was one of my very first dates with my fiance, so I'm already a little biased towards the film. That being said, after rewatching it after Endgame, I still kind of fell in love with it. I don't know if I can continue being in the same state of love with it after all the Russo brothers rewrites. I'm just going to ignore it and tell you that this movie is still a pretty good movie. Number 12. For Roxstar, Iron Man.
For Mr. Panda, Ant-Man and the Wasp.
I guarantee you that if you went and watched Endgame and are very susceptible to crying, there is no way you can get through Iron Man without bawling. There were multiple times I broke down in tears rewatching this. I say 2 days after I watched Endgame, which was like the worst idea I could ever have. For me, it's still the most iconic because it is the beginning of this whole thing, the beginning of cinematic history. And they didn't even know they were making it. They were just making a movie and didn't know where they were going to go with it.
Ant-Man as a character gets heavily redeemed for me in this film because it's just so much fun to watch. The fight scenes are really cool and they bring in a strong female co-character in order to balance things out. Number 11. For Mr. Panda, Spider-Man Homecoming.
For Roxstar, Ant-Man and the Wasp.
After his debut in Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man won our hearts, swinging in right through the front door. The supporting cast is charming and funny, the villain is alright and at least has a very well-written backstory, and I kind of like the dynamic of dating the bad guy's daughter.
I surprisingly ranked Ant-Man and the Wasp lower than Ant-Man. I didn't like it as much as Ant-Man. Ant-Man really surprised me when I went to go see it in the theaters for the first time. I didn't know how they were going to make that movie work, and they did. But Ant-Man and the Wasp, I really, really, really liked it. I really liked the Wasp herself. She was pretty badass. And the fact that they were fighting an even more badass female villain was also an interesting dynamic there. Number 10. For Roxstar, Ant-Man.
For Mr. Panda, Iron Man 2.
Ant-Man is here because of, honestly, the shock value. When I first saw the trailer, I'm like, okay, this is maybe a good idea. I'm not so sure. But the shock value wasn't as high as, say, when Guardians of the Galaxy was announced, which literally no one ever knew. I barely knew about Ant-Man. And I was like, I don't know how you're going to make this crazy idea of a superhero work on screen. The way they did it, it just fascinated me. I love watching them grow big, small, jumping through stuff, like the whole combination was really one of the beginning parts of me for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it started becoming really technologically advanced in movie form. This movie really sucked me in.
The reason this is the highest rank Iron Man movie for me is because it's really where Tony Stark as a character comes out for the first time. In the first one, he's still kind of billionaire playboy the whole time and doesn't have anything to deal with even after being in that cave for so long. Yeah, he has a change of heart and wants to help people and stop making weapons, but it's in Iron Man 2. Amidst his PTSD, amidst his depression, he wakes up and eats donuts on the roof of a donut hut, for gosh sakes. This is really where Tony Stark, the man that we're going to love before he goes, comes out and stays with us for the rest of the series. Number 9. For Mr. Panda, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
For Roxstar, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1.
You can see there's a little bit of disagreement going on here, but Volume 2 for me didn't quite make it to the point where Volume 1, as Roxstar calls it, broke in. While Volume 2 brings back our favorite characters as a team, and does feature a villain who is certainly more interesting than the villain in Volume 1, on the whole it didn't have the same pop and flair and point of amazement, as Roxstar likes to call it, as Guardians of the Galaxy.
Whereas for me, Guardians of the Galaxy 1 lacked a little bit of emotional growth that happened, I think, in Volume 2. Things get really tough in this next bracket, as it's our last bracket of 5 before the top 3. Number 8. For Roxstar, Doctor Strange.
For Mr. Panda, Black Panther. I love that they were able to bring out a new headliner superhero in a completely different environment from all the past movies, and most importantly, it had a basically new supporting cast with only one person who had showed up in the MCU before. Now, if you are wondering why it's down here at number 8 and not a little bit higher, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't understand the political system of Wakanda. It would make perfect sense to me if you could challenge the king when he first ascends. But if you're telling me that anyone can challenge the king at any time, I would love to know why there isn't a coup against every king once they reach age 35.
I really love Doctor Strange. There are so many good things to talk about it, especially when you're talking about Benedict Cumberbatch being Doctor Strange. He literally embodies Stephen Strange, from both this very highly intellectual creature, but somebody who can also let it loose and be funny when he needs to be. And that was always going to be the perfect combination for Benedict Cumberbatch. That's not why this movie is ranked so high. This movie is ranked number 8 for me because it is so trippy. It's amazing. It's one of those movies I had really wished that I went to go watch in IMAX. I missed the opportunity, but just the technological prowess of what they did with this movie. The lore is really interesting to me. The only reason that this isn't ranked higher is because other movies just touched me in a different way, or I related to them a little bit differently. This was just a great origin story, but nothing past that.
Number 7. For Mr. Panda, Guardians of the Galaxy.
For Roxstar, Thor, Ragnarok.
You got a hint of this one already, but let me tell you again. Guardians of the Galaxy completely blew me away. It was one of those examples of the Marvel Universe doing something completely different than what they had done already. Focusing less on dramatic character development and more on fun, that's what it was. Guardians of the Galaxy was pure pop sci-fi contained within the Marvel Universe.
Thor Ragnarok, it mixed this very serious, finding your own way, your own path, forging your own way forward no matter what it takes. It gave us the fun-loving side of Thor that we hadn't seen before until that great man Taika Waititi took it out of Chris Hemsworth and put it on screen for us. Taking someone who was not the favorite child, the black sheep of the MCU, and turning him into one of the Marvel's golden boys. Number 6. For Roxstar, Black Panther.
For Mr. Panda, Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange has managed to do something that no other character origin story has managed to do, and that is create a unique, interesting, well-balanced character with a really cool villain and nothing that happens in the story is dependent on anything else going on in the Marvel Universe at all. On top of that, it's laid the groundwork to do some really interesting work in the future of the Marvel Universe.
Black Panther is one of those movies that made me change my whole view on the MCU from that point. And it wasn't because of anything the main character did. In fact, it was more about the villain and the side characters. Because as much as I really love Black Panther, I really love his character, I felt that in this movie, the side characters outshone him, and all the side characters were mostly women. And this was female empowerment at the very first stages of Marvel, where I feel like we're finally getting more female representation and not just generic female representation. Every woman here had their own unique worldview and their own unique quirks to them that made them strong.
Like when she tosses a spear into a car.
I really love that scene.
Number 5. For Mr. Panda, Spider-Man Far From Home.
For Roxstar, Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 2.
Spider-Man Far From Home is technically the final film of Phase 3, and it goes out with a really great punch. Peter Parker, who's kind of just been this boyish, sidelined character constantly in other films, really comes into his own. It's unfortunate that his character development couldn't come in the first movie that had his name on it, but in this one, he really stands out. Yes, he definitely does some dumb things in line with his previous character, but by the end of it, he finally takes responsibility, and that's what really matters.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 had the aspect of fatherhood and what it means to be a father. With someone who struggled with issues with my own father, this one comes really close to home and is one of the reasons why this one is ranked so high. It was that plot point specifically of family, and that family doesn't always mean blood family. Sometimes family is the one that you choose and that you put together and that you need to work to keep together. All those messages combined in one movie that is also funny and not preachy and not taking itself too seriously is the perfect combination and the perfect storm for me to make one of MCU's greatest movies. Number 4.
For Mr. Panda, Thor Ragnarok.
For Roxstar, Spider-Man Homecoming.
As Roxstar already said, Thor Ragnarok is the best of all of the Thor films. It really manages to take the character Thor and let him break out into his own once again. In the first movie, he already had a character rebuild as a person. In the third movie, he has another one, and it's great. He gets to hit things off really well against the Hulk, and that was a really good decision. Not only does it play with the concepts from some of the expanded Marvel Universe, it allows a humorous and sometimes heartfelt play off of two important characters in the franchise.
After all, the Hulk doesn't really get his own good movie ever, so this is the second closest thing you ever get to that.
Yeah, Thor Ragnarok is probably the best Hulk movie, as well as the best Thor movie.
You guys should know by now, if you've watched enough of our videos, I'm totally biased towards Spider-Man movies. Particularly why I like this one is it's unlike Sam Raimi's or the other Amazing Spider-Man. We don't have to see the spider bite Peter again and Uncle Ben dying and...
I finally figured it out. The reason Roxstar likes the Spider-Man movies now is because there's no spiders in it.
I meant more like the Vulture stealing alien technology because his company got booted out. The origin for this villain is amazing. And man, this Michael Keaton scared the crap out of me.
And now we enter the end game. Number 3. For Mr. Panda, Avengers Endgame.
For Roxstar, Avengers Infinity War.
At this point, you're probably wondering how we managed to have such divergent opinions about what is the best film, which we'll get to very shortly. Perhaps then I need to explain why Avengers Endgame did not do it for me in the end. Avengers Endgame had multiple heartfelt moments. It had amazing action, excellent fight scenes, and ended the things for several characters in a good way. Unfortunately, it didn't do it for all of them, and I don't just mean the characters who are going to persist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Endgame trips over its own ambition for me. a lot of the time-lapse issues don't make sense. We're not even going to dive further into the whole Captain America ending. And isn't it just perfect that the whole reason that this movie is even able to take place and everything happens in the end the way it does is because of a rat? In other words, it's all Mickey Mouse business in the end.
Infinity War was everything I had hoped it would be when I went to go watch it in the theater. It had every character I wanted in it. It had great action. The plot kept me engaged. I was shocked at the end. I don't understand why kids were brought to that movie, because those kids went in kids and came out adults, because literally some of them went out crying and screaming for Spider-Man by the time they left the movie theater. It was like the Transformers movie all over again. All of those parts were great. It kept me engaged. And yet, I felt it was slow-paced at times, especially in the beginning. I kind of wanted them to get to the action a little bit quicker. Thanos was not completed for me in this one. He gets completed for me in Endgame. The whole plot for me for Thanos that makes him one of the greatest MCU villains comes in the second half. This very much felt like a prequel to me, and that's okay. It's still ranked number 3 of all of the MCU movies. Number 2 for Roxstar, Avengers Endgame.
For Mr. Panda, Captain America, The Winter Soldier. What's that? A Phase 2 movie in the top 3? How did that happen? Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Captain America, The Winter Soldier, is the high point of Captain America as a character. He's living in the real world, the modern world, he's dealing with that, and then all of a sudden, everything that he knew was bad in the old days comes back to haunt him. Hydra has taken over his beloved shield. Not only does it focus on Cap as a character dealing with his current situation, the idea that Hydra has been embedded in S.H.I.E.L.D. for so long is a really engaging mix of a spy plot along with a heavy action plot. And it touches on real-world important issues that has modern analogs like drone strikes. Up until the 3rd and 4th Avengers film, this was going to be the top-ranked MCU movie of all time for me. And as far as ones that have a character headline, it remains the best single superhero story out there.
Endgame is just pure fan service with plot in it, the culmination of multiple plot lines. It has its flaws. Every movie has flaws, but Marvel being Marvel, I know that they can fix the problems. Not the way Russo brothers wants to fix the problems by continually offering out press releases talking about how this and that. I mean actually on film. Black Widow was done wrong in this movie. I don't think her death was the greatest part of this movie. And there are other issues with it as well.
The rules of time only matter when they matter and don't when they don't.
Okay, to be fair though, that's like every time traveling movie.
But the whole point was, they said that it wasn't going to be that way. They lied to us.
No, they did not lie to us. It wasn't like all the other ones that break their own rules.
You're right, they waited till the end to break the rules.
Exactly, that was my point. They waited until the end.
At least in Back to the Future, there are no rules.
That's my problem, is I've watched so many other time travel movies that just don't do it right. Time travel is one of those really hard ones to get right, and it feels like by trying to provide us with fan service and also provide us with a time heist, they kind of wrote themselves into a box and they didn't know what to do with it.
Number 1. So what did we end up picking for the top Marvel Cinematic Universe movie so far? For Mr. Panda, Avengers Infinity War.
For Roxstar, Spider-Man Far From Home.
Infinity War ranks number 1 for me for the same reason that Roxstar ranked Endgame where she did. Infinity War, rather than Endgame, is the ultimate culmination point for what they were doing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Think about it for a second. What came between Infinity War and Endgame? 2 movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel. Neither of those films have any major plot elements that bear on Endgame. The sole exception is a post-credits scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp, not part of the film. Infinity War proved once and for all that you can do something that hasn't been seen for decades, and that is a serial film, where people are going to the theater to watch films in a sequence from point 1 to point 20. What it really comes down to is Infinity War packs a huge punch, and Endgame's follow-up was just enough to floor the rest of us. I don't know what's in store for us in the fourth phase, undoubtedly Galactus, but no matter what the comic book nerds are saying, Thanos is set up in Infinity War to be the greatest villain of the Marvel Cinematic history.
Spider-Man Far From Home. I was worried for this movie. It's placed after Endgame. The main person that they have up there is Mysterio, and he's gonna be an ally according to the trailers. Mysterio was never really taken seriously as a character unless you really read the comics and were really into him. They took this movie from me and completely went beyond my wildest imagination with it. They updated Mysterio brilliantly. Mysterio using illusion, using the tech for illusion, brilliant move. The fact that everything he does is fake just to make it look like he can handle an Avengers level disaster. It is really, really good. Teasing Peter Parker to be the next Iron Man and seeing him recreate a whole bunch of things that I remember seeing Tony doing. Remember, right after Endgame, I rewatched Iron Man, and then watching Peter grow up into this person who was just like Tony, unsure of himself, but sure that he needed to take action, and was willing to do that, and secure in himself that he was able to create his own suit to the music. All of that brought back this sort of bookend to this very beginning Infinity Saga. This beautiful bookend that not only bookends the Infinity Saga, but kind of looks forward to what we could possibly be seeing in Phase 4 with betrayals, with Peter Parker being unmasked, and what is that going to do for him, and MJ, and all these other interesting plot points that they managed to also put into something that was supposed to cap end a whole saga. It's just amazing to me what they managed to do with this movie, and I left the movie theater being elated, and I couldn't wait to rewatch it again.